Dear America, none of this is fucking normal, and don't listen to the people who try to fucking convince you that it is. And they don't have our fucking best interests at heart, but in fact, we stand on the precipice of fucking disaster, and we're fucking running out of time. Now, Donald Trump, the former squatter of the United States and political crime boss of the Republican Party, continues to threaten enemies with lethal violence. At this point, his enemies include anyone who oppose him or who he sees standing in his way. Now, Trump is an entrepreneur, but a failed one at that. Um, but he's um, but he's an entrepreneur of both political and interpersonal violence, although he's far too cowardly to engage in violence himself. His threats need to be taken seriously. Now, yet the mainstream media news as a whole, along with most of the country's political class, have decided to basically just stay silent in response to Trump's threats of mayhem. Now, as people like to think, they have moved on, which in this case makes them like the three proverbial monkeys who basically, you ever hear the old saying was, hear no evil, speak no evil, and see no evil. Now, instead of outrage, it's basically we're feeling fucking exhausted. The American people are growing increasingly indifferent to Trump's fucking threats and to the rising power of his neo-fascist movement and the Republican Party's threats against democracy and the rule of law. Now, honestly, who can blame the public for its general reaction? It is supposed to be the responsibility of a free press to tell the public what is important and how we go about thinking about it. As an institution, the mainstream media has largely failed in that regard, and for a variety of reasons, as normalized in the age of Trump and its effects. Basically, it appears that the media and political classes have convinced themselves that if they ignore Trump's threats, they look at it as like they don't matter and the danger will go away, and that's not how the real world fucking works. Now, this is what Trump said last Saturday when he issued a proclamation from his shitty palace at Mar-a-Lago. The latest pleading from Special Counsel Robert Durham provides indisputable evidence that my campaign and squadron were spied on. No, it wasn't. By operatives paid by Hillary Clinton, which they already debunked that, in an effort to develop a completely fabricated connection to Russia, which Trump does have a connection to Russia. This is a scandal far greater in scope and magnitude than Watergate. No, it's not. And those who were involved and knew about the spying operation, which there was no spying, should be subjected to criminal prosecution. And in a stronger period of time, our country, this crime would have been punishable by death. And in addition, reparations should be paid to those in our country who have been damaged by this. Nobody was damaged by this. Donald Trump is literally threatening Hillary Clinton and her campaign staff with death, but Trump's sycophants are listening closely. And needless to say, Trump's statement is false in virtually every detail. There is no evidence that Trump's campaign was spied on, or illegally or otherwise. His allegations are based on a grotesque misrepresentation of the claims that were made by Durham, whose name is John, not Robert, as promulgated by Foe and other right-wing propaganda media. Now, how did the American mainstream news media respond to Trump's latest death threats? With some polite fact-checking, but largely with silence. That this amounts to permission or even encouragement of more threats to come along. This is by no means the first time Trump has threatened Hillary Clinton or other Democrats with death or grievous physical harm. Now, Trump and his various allies, or like what I'd like to call them, sycophants, have made such threats since at least the beginning of his 2016 campaign. At one point during that campaign, Trump suggested that the Second Amendment people might have to deal with Clinton if she were elected, and Trump's attraction to violence is a major reason for why he defeated Clinton in that election. But actually, he didn't really defeat Clinton. The joke of Electoral College put him in. In many respects, Trumpism thrives on encouraging all kinds of antisocial and destructive behavior, which also includes murder and mob violence. Now, political observers and other public voices often write about right-wing political violence in a conditional language, suggesting that such events are coming or escalating, or they may take place in the future. Now, this too is a form of denial about the level of violence, death, loss, and pain that Trump and his sycophantic movement have already inflicted on the American people. In reality, fascist violence is here and now. At his recent Klan rally, Donald Trump has seemingly been trying to incite a race war in which white people visit massive violence upon black and brown people, and Trump has also suggested that his sycophants will descend upon America's major cities and cause mayhem if he faces prosecution for his obvious crimes. Now, Trump and his cabal attempted a coup on January 6th of 2021, which involved a lethal attack on the Capitol. Now, the Trump regime also presided over a record increase in racism, anti-Semitic, and homophobic hate crimes. Trump encouraged and valorized police brutality and thuggery against black and brown people and other marginalized communities. His regime literally created a concentration camp system in which thousands of non-white migrants and refugees were imprisoned, and some of them subjected to physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. The families were torn apart as part of an official policy of deterrence that was designed to terrorize non-white migrants and refugees and their communities and to reduce immigration to the United States from black and brown countries. Now, Trump's reign saw a number of mass shootings, including several that were committed by his sycophantic white supremacist voters. Now, Trump himself described the neo-Nazis and other white supremacists who rampaged in Charlottesville in 2017 as very fine people. Though negligence and malevolence, Trump's regime engaged in genocide in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Ultimately, at least 1 million Americans will die from COVID, but most of those deaths were directly or indirectly caused by the Trump administration's shitty policy choices. The United States has been pushed toward a second civil war by Trump's Republican fascist movement. The public opinion research shows that tens of millions of white Republicans are prepared to support and condone political violence against Democrats and other perceived enemies in order to defend what they refer to as traditional America. The human mind has a complex relationship to pain. Sources of injury and pain are identified as a defense against further harm, but while the specific sensation of pain can be remembered and described, the pain itself cannot be summoned up by most people. Now, many people live with chronic pain, and over time, their minds develop, in a way, of processing and surviving that pain. This can also be true of both emotional pain, which essentially becomes a new normal. For American society to acknowledge the real and serious damage that was caused by the Trump's movement, constant threats of death and violence would require great individual and collective pain, and this helps to explain the collective desire to block that reality from memory in an effort to find or create some type of normalcy in a country that is mired in numerous crises and struggling for the survival of its democracy in a moment of ascendant fascism. But for this search for normalcy and as a panacea, or perhaps as palliative care, for an alien country is based on a false premise. The old version of normal wasn't that great for most Americans anyway, but Trumpism and neo-fascism are acutely painful, but that pain is a symptom of something that's much deeper. Trump's movement is the product of many pre-existing forces. Now we have white supremacy and racism, sexism, misogyny, a culture of violence and cruelty, collective narcissism, a society oriented around spectacle and distraction, empty consumerism, extreme wealth and income inequality, anti-intellectualism and anti-rationality, conspiracy thinking, radical right-wing Christianity, which when it comes to Republicans, they're not Christian anyway, a gutting of the commons, and social democracy and other structural and cultural problems. As a group, the millions of Americans who voted for the dumbass Trump in 2016 and 2020, and there were even more the second time, were searching for a type of liberation through destruction. They wanted to hurt other people as a way of lifting themselves up. Literally and metaphorically, they stand on the necks of others in an effort to make themselves feel taller. Now, in his book about Brexit, The Politics of Pain, Irish journalist Fintan O'Toole describes such destructive impulses in the context of what he and others have called satel populism or satel politics. Any transgression is revolutionary, even if it celebrates self-harm. Now, why do people cut themselves? Obviously, because they're unhappy, they are frustrated and angry. They feel that no one cares about them and no one listens to them. But it still seems hard to understand the attractions of inflicting pain on yourself. Three things seem to make cutting addictive. One is that it gives the pain you feel a name and a location. It becomes tangible and visible. It has an immediate focus that is somehow more tolerable than the larger, deeper distress. The second is that if you take the illusion of control, you choose to do it, you are taking an action and producing a result. It is kind of like a power, even if the only way you can exercise that power is over yourself, and even if the only thing you can do to yourself is damage. And the third one is that it can seem in an unhappy mind like an act of love, and you could hurt yourself for someone or something. In his book, Our Malady, historian Timothy Snyder offers these complementary insights about the body in pain and the American body politic in crisis. I think that our death wish has to do with a growing imbalance between solitude and solidarity, with a rage that when not balanced by empathy, it undermines rather than affirms our freedom. We have finally come to a conclusion that most members of the American commentariat and media class are personally, professionally, and temperamentally incapable of speaking truth to power, or of the critical self-reflection that is necessary to effectively respond to the country's current crisis. Now, to do this kind of thing, and demanding intellectual and emotional work, would cause them, both as individuals and a class, a type of ego death, or at the minimum, great narcissistic injury. Now, in The Guardian, Stephen Marble offers a powerful intervention that merits lengthy quotation. Now, this is what Stephen Marble has said. The right has recognized what the left has not, that the system is in a collapse. The Republicans have a plan. It involves violence. They have not abjured even the Oath Keepers, and the Democrats meanwhile have chosen infighting as their sport. And there will be those who say that warning of a new civil war is alarmist. All I can say is that reality has outpaced even the most alarmist predictions. Now imagine we go back 10 years and explaining that a Republican squatter would openly support the dictatorship of North Korea. No conspiracy theorist would have ever dared to dream that. Anyone who foresaw dimly, and the trends are apparent, and their ends were not. It would be entirely possible for the United States to implement a modern electoral system to restore legitimacy to the courts, and to reform its police forces, and to root out domestic terrorism, to alter its tax code to address inequality, to prepare its cities and its agriculture for the effects of climate change, and to regulate and to control the mechanisms of violence. Now, all of these futures are possible, but there is only one hope: that it must be rejected outright. The hope is that everything will work out by itself, that America will bumble along into better times. It won't. Americans have believed their country is an exception, a necessary nation. If history has shown us anything, that it's that the world doesn't have any necessary nations. And does the country have the humility to acknowledge that its old orders no longer fucking work? Does it have the courage to begin again? As it managed to so spectacularly at the birth of its nationhood, the United States requires the boldness to invent a new politics for a new era. It's entirely possible that it might do so, but America is, after all, a country devoted to fucking reinvention. Now, in the end, Donald Trump and his sycophantic inbreds will continue to escalate their threats of political violence. There will be more acts of right-wing political violence and terrorism on an even larger scale, and then and obviously there will be another January 6th coup, and possibly something worse along. The mainstream pundits will again hide behind words such as "this is also shocking and unthinkable and cannot happen in America." The universal I and we will be trotted out ad nauseum as a way of shifting responsibility, and everyone's sin somehow becomes no one's sin. And Americans are people in pain. We cannot cure the pain with comforting language, and we will never begin to address the pain unless we first confront and acknowledge its deeper structural causes, and too many of us are trying to self-medicate with denial. This fucking won't work. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. And also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can contribute to Patreon and donate whatever you want. So yeah.